Without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Tamar Weisz-Koves to present a webinar tonight for you on mentoring provisionally registered teachers. Welcome, Tamar.
Thanks, Angela. Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to this webinar, which will focus on the mentor teacher's role in supporting teachers working towards their full registration. My name is Tamar Weisz-Koves, and I'll be facilitating this webinar, working alongside Angela Bush and Tina Rose this evening. I've prepared a PowerPoint which will provide a framework for tonight's discussion, but please feel free to use the chat line to type in any questions you may have as we go along. So here's an overview of the 7 things you will gain from this webinar. 1 is clarification of what you need to know and do at the start of a teacher's provisional registration journey. 2, clarification of the Teachers' Council's expectations. 3, knowledge of the key documents relating to teacher registration and mentoring and where to find this information. 4, clarification of the mentor's role. 5, knowledge about gathering evidence and documenting the process. 6, clarification of what's involved in completing a teacher's application for full registration. And 7, answers to questions you may have about mentoring. Before we begin, it would be really helpful to set the scene by finding out where people are coming from this evening. Okay, we'll put up a poll soon to ask you the questions: how long have you been a mentor, and how many PRTs are you working with? All right, so we've got some responses coming through at the moment. 25% of you are saying less than 6 months, 75% more than a year. So that gives me a little bit of background information about where you're coming from. As Angela said at the beginning, I'm guessing you've come with lots of questions this evening. Please feel free to type in any questions that you have about mentoring in the chat line. We'll revisit your questions later on in the webinar to make sure that they've been answered. While we're waiting for questions to come through, let's talk about what you need to know and do at the start of a provisional teacher's registration journey. Before a teacher can begin their provisional teacher registration journey, they need to have a current practicing certificate issued by the Teachers' Council. They need to be employed as a teacher for at least 20 regular hours per week in an early childhood setting recognised by the Teachers' Council. And they need to have a mentor who is fully registered throughout the duration of the provisional process and can commit to meeting with them on a regular basis. Interestingly, the Teachers' Council doesn't provide a definition of what regular means, but in my work as an external mentor, I visit teachers every 4 to 8 weeks. Before you start working together, it's important to consider how and when you are going to make time for you and the PRT to meet regularly. The Teachers' Council also expects that centres will have established regular appraisal systems and that their appraisal documents link to the registered teacher criteria in a meaningful way. Before you start working with a PRT, make sure that the centre has a regular appraisal system which links to the registered teacher criteria. When a teacher fills out their application for full registration, both you and the centre manager will need to sign a declaration to confirm that this teacher has been appraised in a meaningful way against the registered teacher criteria. In my experience, this is something the Teachers' Council is focusing on at the moment, and teachers may be asked to supply a copy of the centre's appraisal document when they apply for their full registration. Before you start working with a PRT, I recommend that you take time to read the information on gaining full registration and mentoring on the Teachers' Council's website. This website provides key information about what you and the PRT need to know and do and how to work productively together. The Teachers' Council has published 2 key documents to inform and guide your practice. These include the Registered Teacher Criteria Handbook and the Guidelines for Induction in Mentoring and Mentor Teachers. Both of these are available on the Teachers Council's website. If you can't find the information you need, then you can contact the Teachers Council directly with your questions. In my experience, you usually get a quicker response if you phone rather than email them. So here's the summary of the points we've covered so far. Before you begin working with a PRT, check that they have a current practicing certificate. Check that they are employed at least 20 regular hours per week in a setting recognised by the Teachers Council. Check that your own registration is current and that you can commit to working with a PRT for at least 2 years. Consider how and when you are going to have regular times for formal meetings. Check that the centre has a regular appraisal system in place and that the centre's appraisal document links meaningfully to the registered teacher criteria. Familiarise yourself with the Teachers Council's website. Read the Teachers Council's Registered Teacher Criteria Handbook and their guidelines for induction and mentoring. And if you still have questions, contact the Teachers Council directly. Once all these things are in place, you and the PRT can begin the provisional teacher registration journey. This journey will take a minimum of 2 years, but can take longer depending on whether circumstances change, how motivated a PRT is, and how much time it takes for you to be satisfied that a PRT is meeting all the registered teacher criteria. Note that a teacher can only be provisionally registered for 6 years. If for some reason the process cannot be completed within 6 years, then contact the Teachers Council for guidance.
Tamar, interesting question here. In your experience, do most centres provide time for mentor and PRT to meet regularly during work hours?
I think that management who understand and value the process will make sure that there are systems in place for this to happen. I know that it's a challenge. That's why I've recommended that you think about it and maybe talk about it with management at the start. You know, what's the expectation around how are you going to potentially have 2 people off the floor to have in-depth discussions and meetings. So it's definitely something that needs to be considered.
Would you like to, we'll just do the other poll here that we've got, which will give us an idea of how many PRTs people are working with. So if you can just take a minute to just let us know whether maybe you're not working with anyone at the moment or maybe just one person or 2 or more, that would be great. If you could just give us some idea, and we'll just leave this poll open for a few more seconds.
And Tina, I just remembered that I'm sitting on my iPad at the moment and I'm unable to participate because I'm on an iPad. Believe it or not, Apple is not up to scratch.
Yeah, if you are on an iPad, feel free to just type in the question, type in what you're doing in terms of whether you are mentoring at the moment and how many people. So I'm going to close the poll now and share it with you. So a quarter of the people are not yet mentoring, and 50% one and quarter 2 or more. So that gives you a bit of an idea.
Yeah, so that's a range of people who are working with 2 or more, or people who haven't started yet. So it's a good range there. So hopefully you'll, this webinar will answer all the questions that you have. Okay, so we're ready to move along?
Yep.
So in the next section, we're going to look at the purpose of teacher registration. According to the Teachers Council, teacher registration signals that a person is an official member of the teaching profession and that they are committed to quality when it comes to teaching and learning. It's important to keep in mind that the purpose of teacher registration is to ensure that a minimum quality standard is applied to all teachers entering or currently teaching in New Zealand's general education system. As a mentor, it is your responsibility to vouch for a teacher's practice and to ensure that they are meeting the standards required by the Teachers Council. These standards are specified in the Registered Teacher Criteria Handbook. I strongly recommend that both mentors and PRTs read and familiarise themselves with the Teachers Council's Registered Teacher Criteria Handbook. It provides a useful overview of the 12 RTC along with key indicators and reflective questions which will help teachers understand the RTC and give them ideas about how they can show they are demonstrating them in their practice.
Tamar, another question. Do you
Sure.
think there is value in PRTs and mentors meeting with others in a group to talk about professional issues and the PRT process?
Yeah, absolutely. If you read the guidelines for induction and mentoring, they actually talk about characteristics of quality mentoring, and that involves a community approach rather than just having a teacher and mentor work in isolation. I think PRTs will be learning from other people within their community as well. So, the more connections you have, the better in that sense.
Great, thank you.
So documenting how a PRT is developing as a teacher and meeting the RTC will form the basis of your work together. This can take the form of observations of their practice, professional discussions, goal setting, reflections, and supporting documentation from their daily practice. A typical visit for me takes approximately 1 to 2 hours. During this time, I observe a teacher while reading their folder, after which we have time off the floor to engage in professional discussion and goals set together. After each meeting, I type up a summary of what was discussed and add to the summary of evidence form I've developed to show how I'm appraising a teacher's practice against the RTC. I then email these to the PRT so that they have a copy for their records. So something to keep in mind there is that it is a commitment for a mentor to work with someone, and it involves, documenting, not just conversations. Although professional discussions are important, you really need to be documenting the journey that you take together.
Another question here for you. What is supporting documentation?
We're going to talk about that soon.
Right.
And if I don't answer your question, ask it again. But we're going to be talking about the different forms of documentation that a teacher can be putting in their registration folder. And here it is. Here is a picture of the registration folder. So as part of their professional journey, a teacher will need to set up a folder in which they place reflections and additional forms of documentation along with evidence of how the two of you are working together. When a teacher applies for full registration, the Teachers' Council may request to see this folder. There are some key records which need to be kept as part of the provisional registration process. I advise mentors and PRTs to keep copies of the following records. The first is a comprehensive record of the dates of all the meetings that you've had together. The Teachers' Council is likely to ask to see this, so my recommendation is that you include a photocopy with a PRT's application for full registration when the time comes. The second is a list of all the professional development the PRT has undertaken during the provisional registration process. I advise PRTs to keep a record of all their professional development and to attach a photocopy of this when they apply for their full registration. And thirdly, I advise mentors to keep records of observations and to summarise the content of formal meetings that they have with a PRT. Summaries of meetings could include information about what you've observed, the issues you've discussed, areas of development and goal setting. It's important to provide PRTs with copies of these so that they can place them in their teacher registration folder as evidence of how you have worked together. Part of your role as a mentor is to document how you see the PRT meeting the registered teacher criteria. The Teachers' Council may ask to see evidence of how you have appraised the PRT's practice. One way you can do this is by linking to the RTC and your records of meetings. I've also developed a summary of evidence form which will be available on the Education Unlimited website. You're welcome to use this form, or you may choose to develop your own systems. The main thing is that by the end of the provisional journey, you and the PRT have gathered a range of documentation which provides evidence of how they are meeting the RTC. Be prepared to provide some or all of this documentation to the Teachers' Council as requested when they apply for their full registration.
Tamar, a couple of questions here. It was recently recommended to me that at least one of the PRT's personal goals be aligned with centre goals, strategic plans or self-reviews.
Yeah, completely. It makes complete sense that the teacher's provisional journey is taking place within a context and for it to be connected. It's a much more meaningful process. I do things like I advise teachers to put copies of their appraisal documents in their folders. We talk about the goals which have been set. There's usually a combination of individual goals and centre goals. And part of what the teacher can do is track their progress towards those goals. So, yeah, absolutely, it makes complete sense.
And one more before we move on. Have you had any experience of online PRT portfolios? Do you recommend these?
Funny, we've just started talking about these. I haven't seen one in action. I've been on Educa's website, and who were you talking about before, Angela?
Our centre has started to use ECE Astute online teaching portfolios for all staff, whether they're fully registered or provisionally registered.
Yeah. And how are you finding that so far?
We haven't started really. We've only just signed up. So, but I can see some advantages in it, in that staff can invite anybody to view their portfolio and contribute to it and give them feedback. And it's stored in a central place online. So accessibility is very good.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes over time.
Yeah. Watch this space.
Yeah.
Maybe Angela will be offering a webinar on it in the future. So yes, my experience of that is limited at this stage, but I'm really, really curious to see how it works out. And open to it as well, because these days everything seems to be happening more and more online. So, I'm not surprised that's the direction things are going in. So just to recap the last section, this in terms of the records that you and the PRT need to be keeping together, you need to make sure that you keep a list of dates that you've had meetings, that you keep a record of all the professional development the PRT has undertaken, that you provide summaries of what was observed and discussed at these meetings, and that you have evidence of how you have appraised the PRT against the RTC. And that's definitely something that the Teachers' Council has been asking for in some situations I've been directly involved with. So keep your documentation.
There's just a comment here. AKA has encouraged us to create a personal blog for our folder.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Because that allows people to comment as well and contribute to what people are writing. It's great. Good idea.
Yeah, so you like that idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the thing for me there is, what happens if you want to write something personal? Would you keep, you'd be careful about what you're putting on a blog that's out there in public space.
Blogs can be made public or private, invitation only. So I suppose you could, you would invite people only that you feel comfortable viewing your blog, so it's not necessarily public for anybody to read. That would be my imagination. But those folks from AKA tonight could perhaps type something in the question bar there and let us know.
Yeah, they're saying here it's a private one by invitation only.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, AKA.
Thanks.
So people are finding different ways to do it, and that's great. And what I'm sharing with you tonight is based on my experience. And you'll be able to develop your own systems as well. I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I've helped about 20 teachers get their full registration. I'm working with another 20, and in that time I've clocked up a bit of experience in terms of what the Teachers' Council may ask to see. So that's what I'm basing tonight's webinar on. And no doubt that will change over time as well. So in the beginning, the provisional teacher registration journey can seem a bit daunting, and teachers are likely to feel unsure and have many questions about what's involved. Typically, teachers have lots of questions about starting their teacher registration folder, in particular how to structure their folder, the kinds of things to put in it, and how often they should be writing reflections. The answer is there's no fixed number of entries that teachers are required to have in their folder, but as a general rule, I suggest that they aim for depth and quality and write about things which are genuinely meaningful for them. As a guideline, I advise teachers to include at least 2 pieces of documentation per month, made up of a combination of reflections and a range of documentation from their daily practice. So we're getting to that question that someone asked earlier about what is supporting documentation. Ideally, teachers will be considering the whys as well as the whats when it comes to effective teaching. I'm often asked if teachers have to use a model of reflection in their teacher registration folder. The answer is no, they do not have to use a model of reflection, but they can choose to do so if they find it helpful. The important thing is that they show that they're reflecting on their practice and developing as a result. In addition to writing reflections, they could include other forms of documentation from their daily practice with children and adults. For example, they could include their personal philosophy, examples of learning stories and planning, records of staff meetings and professional development, literature reviews, parent notices, documentation of trips and other special events, mind maps, readings and photographs, almost anything related to their practice with children and adults. I advise teachers to be smart about this process rather than creating a lot of extra work for themselves. You know, have a look at all the documentation that you are already generating in your daily practice and use that. You know, it's valid, so include it. When a PRT applies for full registration, the Teachers' Council may read the Centre's ERO report and ask the PRT to provide evidence of how they've been responding to ERO's recommendations. I advise PRTs to include documentation and reflection on ERO visits in their centre and examples of how they've been responding to recommendations in their practice. It also makes sense for teachers to include a copy of their performance appraisal along with evidence of how they are working towards individual and centre goals set during these appraisals. So that goes back to another earlier question. Teachers need to be making connections to Te Whāreki and other professional literature throughout their teacher registration folder. One of the key indicators for criteria 12 is that a teacher engages with evidence and professional literature to reflect on and refine their practice. I remind PRTs to make time to read professional literature as it's a valuable way of deepening their knowledge base and staying current. It's a good idea for PRTs to include and reflect on specific readings which have influenced their thinking and practice. And as a mentor, you may also recommend readings that you may think would be useful to them.
Or webinars.
Or webinars, Angela. Yeah, I know one of the challenges for teachers is making time to read, but it is valuable in addition to other forms of professional development. One thing teachers seem unsure about in the beginning is how to structure their folder. That's where something like the online portfolios kind of maybe one of the advantages is that they kind of set it up for you and you slot your work into it. So that saves, that's one way around that issue. There's no one right way for a PRT to structure their folder. The main thing is that their work is clear and understandable to someone else reading it. In my experience, teachers tend to take one of two approaches to organising their registration folder. The first is dividing their folder into 12 clearly labelled sections, one for each of the 12 criteria, and this involves slotting reflections and other documentation into the section they think it best relates to. Or two, filing their work according to the date. If a PRT chooses this option, then it's a good idea for them to clearly identify the criteria they think each reflection or piece of documentation relates to. The Early Childhood Council also puts out a blue book, which is a folder teachers can purchase if they want the security of having a folder with reflective questions and different sections already set up for them. Some people find that useful, but in my experience, you can do that yourself just as well. We're now going to take a closer look at the mentoring role. The professional registration process recognises that effective teaching involves skills, knowledge and experience which build on a teacher's initial teaching qualification. In addition to ensuring that a teacher is meeting the standards required by the Teachers' Council, professional registration is a way of inducting new teachers into the profession and ensuring that they are supported as they begin their teaching journey. As such, a mentor will have many roles. On page 16 of the Guidelines for Induction and Mentoring and Mentor Teachers, the Teachers Council identifies the following as part of the mentor teacher's role: providing support, demonstrating effective teaching, facilitating learning conversations, assisting the PRT to plan effectively, observing and providing feedback, assisting the PRT to gather and analyse data about ARC on the learning, guiding the PRT towards professional leadership practices, supporting the PRT to become part of the wider learning community, providing formal assessment of the PRT's progress in relation to the RTC, suggesting suitable PD, advocating for the PRT if needed, listening to and helping the PRT to solve problems. So there's a lot of roles there. One thing for sure, mentoring is not about telling someone what to do. It's about fostering constructive relationships and working in partnership with a PRT. On page 26 of the Guidelines for Induction and Mentoring Mentor Teachers, the Teachers Council provides an interesting overview of the differences between limited and high-quality induction and mentoring. High-quality induction and mentoring involves many characteristics, including engaging in serious professional discussions. Learning conversations are a vital component of quality induction and mentoring. These involve active listening, exploring deeper issues, and challenging pedagogy. So, it's really important to make time to engage in those discussions. Another characteristic of high-quality induction and mentoring is that it's goal-orientated and focuses on building a teacher's knowledge and confidence. High-quality induction and mentoring also develops teacher autonomy and agency by encouraging teachers to reflect in greater depth on their practice, take responsibility, and determine the next steps for themselves. And high-quality induction and mentoring is situated in educational communities which value the importance of mentoring and provide support for both the PRT and the mentor teacher. Ideally, mentoring is not an isolated process, but takes place through an educational community in a range of ways and relationships. It's a good idea for mentors and management to touch base with each other regarding a teacher's development and progress so that any issues can be addressed before a teacher applies for full registration and so that management can provide support when needed.
Tamar, question here might be appropriate in terms of what you were just talking about. What if there is an aspect of their practice that you just don't agree with philosophically?
Yeah, that's where you need to be honest with yourself as a mentor. Sometimes people just have different values and different ways of seeing things, and the world would be a strange place if everybody thought exactly the same. And we're often most comfortable when people are similar to ourselves, but those differences can be really interesting to explore as well. So you need to weigh up, is it a question of, say, poor practice, or is it just that somebody is really different to you and that is valid,
Fair point.
Hopefully that answered that person's question. I guess, just thinking about the question again, if philosophically you found yourself in such a different place that you felt uncomfortable working with someone, then, possibly it would be better for that teacher to work with another mentor. One of the things which the Teachers Council does say in the guidelines is, it's that relationship is really important, and you need to find a good fit between the mentor and the teacher rather than just picking someone for convenience. So, that's something that to be considered. For more in-depth discussion of the mentoring role and characteristics of quality induction and mentoring, I recommend that all PRTs and mentor teachers read the Teachers Council's guidelines. As previously mentioned, these are available on the Teachers Council's website. Right, so we're going to talk about what's involved in applying for a teacher's full registration. After a minimum of 2 years, once you are satisfied that a PRT is meeting all the registered teacher criteria and that you and the PRT have sufficient evidence to provide the Teachers' Council if required, you can go ahead and fill out the TC2 form available on the Teachers' Council's website. In this form, the teacher will be asked for information about their teaching service and induction and mentoring program, including the name and registration number of their mentor teacher. As a teacher mentor, you are required to fill out Section E, in which you sign a declaration that you have appraised this teacher according to the registered teacher criteria and that you recommend that they be granted their full registration. Management is required to complete Section F in order to endorse this application. So what to attach? Depending on who is paying, either the teacher or centre will need to attach payment to the TC2 form. As a teacher mentor, check that all the required sections have been filled out accurately and that the teacher has attached copies of the list of dates you had meetings together along with their record of professional development. The teacher will then send off their application to the Teachers' Council. The Teachers' Council will send an email to the teacher acknowledging that they have received their application. The Teachers' Council will let the teacher know if they want to see their folder or if they require additional information. At this stage, the PRT may contact you for clarification about what the Teachers' Council is asking for. So be aware that this can be a stressful time for the PRT and that this process may take a few weeks or months to complete. Once the Teachers' Council is satisfied, they will send the teacher an email confirming that they have been granted full registration, and this will be followed up with a letter in the post. And then it's time to celebrate. We're nearing the end of the webinar now, so let's have a look at the questions that you had and make sure we've answered them.
Sure, just a couple more. In your experience, are there any RTCs that are more challenging than others to meet or provide evidence for?
Yes, absolutely. It depends on the context you work in and your own personal background. I know a lot of teachers find the ones to do with bicultural practice challenging to write about. Leadership may also be another one that they find tricky to write about if they're not used to seeing themselves as teacher leaders, or if they're not in a position of responsibility. But if you look at the key indicators for that, it's about taking responsibility and contributing to the learning community. So, there are ways into that one. But yeah, those are probably the ones to do with bicultural practice, I think, are probably the ones that people feel them the most out of their comfort zone with. So they'll be looking for practical ideas for what this means in terms of their practice. And if there's not a lot happening in their centre, then that's the ideal place to goal set and get people actually developing their skills in this area.
Do you know of any formal PRT or mentor networks available?
Angela, do you?
I don't. No, I don't. Sorry. Not really. Other than centres getting together or kindergartens finding and contacting other kindergartens who've got PRTs and finding ways to get together and have professional conversations or talk about their registration process. Yeah.
Okay, finally, any other recommended reading for mentors to develop mentoring practice?
Ooh, do you know, I Googled teacher registration mentoring and my photo came up for a start, which was a bit shocking, but a whole lot of readings did as well, like photos of books specifically about mentoring. So I think if you started to look, you would find lots of information out there. It's just a matter of starting with a Google search and seeing where that takes you.
And that would be New Zealand context or international?
I'm guessing it would be international. I'm not aware of any books in a New Zealand context. It doesn't mean they don't exist, just I'm not aware of them, or maybe that's an area for someone to write about.
And I think finally, have you ever had a PRT you weren't happy to sign off?
Yes, I've had PRTs that I've what's tended to happen is sometimes I've come in at the end of a PRT's journey when another mentor has been unable to finish the process, and I've come in towards the end. And that's been a bit trickier because you get to know people quite well over 2 years. But if you're only working with someone for 5 or 6 months, you don't have that same time to get to know them. So yes, I have had issues with people's practice, and that's where it's good that it's a process, and you address those with people, you talk about it, you goal set. Hopefully you see meaningful changes. If you don't, that's when I've started having conversations with management and talking about, and usually you will find that if you have concerns, then the centre will have concerns. And so, that idea of the performance appraisal, does impact on the registration process as well. That is something to consider, is how is this teacher doing in this setting? Does the centre seem happy with their development? And I guess you just have to be honest. I mean, it's definitely a dilemma if you've been paid to be someone's mentor, which is I am as an external mentor, but you have to make a decision because it's your reputation, and the Teachers Council is trusting your judgment. So if you're uncomfortable with someone's practice and they're not changing, then maybe that's a conversation you need to have with them, that you don't feel comfortable supporting them.
Sure. A couple of questions before we finish off, and then we've got a final poll for you and an exit survey, and we'd really appreciate if you could do that. Are there any readings that are useful when starting the registration process?
The ones that I recommended, you've got to read the Registered Teacher Criteria Handbook, and you've got to read the guidelines for induction and mentoring, and spend some time exploring the Teachers Council's website, because there's a lot of information on there, and they will have links to other information as well. So, that's the best place to start. And if you're still interested in finding out more, then, one thing will lead to another.
And we also have a couple of other webinar recordings on our website that people can access that are more directed at the PRTs themselves as opposed to mentors, but people may find those useful as a mentor if they're a first-time mentor perhaps, or they're just looking for some more information about the provisional registration process. So those are available on our website if you go and have a look at them as well.
Great. Final question, can you suggest a PRT take more time than 2 years?
Yes. Especially if you're not being paid to do it. I mean, I know the pressure for me when I go into centres is if I'm being paid is that, it's expensive, and so, centres usually don't want to spend more money than necessary. But, if they're understanding that it's about quality, then, you need to be comfortable with someone's practice before you sign them off. And sometimes that takes a bit longer. So, don't be afraid to say, hey, look, I think we need to work on these things before I'm comfortable with signing you off. It only takes a minimum of 2 years, and I think sometimes people think that it only takes 2 years, but actually that's the minimum.
Right. I'm just going to put the last poll out before we finish off. So if you could all let us know if you found the content of the webinar useful, it would be great to have that feedback. And then remember, there is a final survey, which when the webinar finishes very shortly, you'll just be asked a few questions and let us know what else you'd like us to cover. It would be fantastic. So just while we're waiting for this, and that's great, we've got 100% of people who have attended tonight have found it useful, so that's awesome.
That's
well done, Tamar. Great work. So on that very happy note, I'd like to say thanks a lot to Tamar for joining us, and to all of you out there who've made the effort to spend 45 minutes of your evening finding out about the process of being a mentor.